All right, everybody, buckle up, because today we're diving into something that could really hit home.
Yeah.
We're talking taxes, immigration, federal spending
The
regulations,
whole 9 yards.
the works. It's a
Mm,
potential mega bill making waves in Washington,
A mega bill. That's one way to put it.
and it's being spearheaded by none other than the Trump administration and House Speaker Mike Johnson.
That's right. This is a huge legislative push from the top.
And it's already stirring up a ton of debate on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, yeah. You can definitely say that again.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Please.
let's break it down for our listeners. What exactly are they trying to pull off with this bill?
Well, basically, it's like they took all of Trump's biggest campaign promises
Okay.
and crammed them into one massive piece of legislation.
Like a legislative turducken?
Kind of. It's got tighter border security, major tax cuts, a big push for energy deregulation,
Okay, so less taxes changes at the border and maybe even cheaper gas.
potentially. But here's the catch. They're also talking about some pretty deep cuts to federal spending.
Ah, so that's how they're going to try to balance the books.
Right, because let's be real, those tax cuts aren't going to pay for themselves.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Especially when you hear numbers like the one from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
Yeah, those guys, they estimate that extending Trump's previous tax cuts, like this bill proposes, could add a whopping $5 trillion to the federal deficit over the next decade.
$5 trillion with a T. That's an insane amount of money.
It is. To put it in perspective, that's like adding the entire GDP of Japan to our national debt.
Yikes. So how are the Republicans justifying a potentially massive increase in the deficit like that?
Their argument is that the economic growth from the tax cuts plus the extra revenue from energy deregulation will make up for it.
Basically trickle-down economics on steroids.
You could say that they're banking on a booming economy to generate more tax revenue, even with lower rates.
Sounds like a pretty big gamble to me.
It is, and a lot of experts are skeptical. Those offsets might be way too optimistic. Right, because history kind of shows us that tax cuts don't always lead to the kind of growth needed to actually offset the cost.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of uncertainty there.
So a lot of ifs and maybes, but hold on a second. Didn't they originally plan to split these proposals into separate bills?
They did. There was talk of a more piecemeal approach.
So what changed? Why cram everything into this one mega bill?
Well, rumor has it there was a little strategy session down at Mar-a-Lago.
Uh-huh.
Trump, Vance, and Speaker Johnson all huddled up and decided to go all in.
Interesting. So what's the thinking behind that?
It's all about forcing compromise. By lumping everything together, they're hoping to make it harder for anyone to vote against the whole package.
So it's like a take it or leave it kind of deal.
Exactly. They figure if the bill has something for everyone, it'll be harder to say no.
But doesn't that also make it a much bigger target for criticism? I mean, it seems like it'd be way easier to pick apart and find things to oppose.
For sure. And that's the risk they're taking. Some Republicans, even in the Senate, have said that this mega bill could actually slow things down on urgent issues like border security.
Oh, wow. So even within their own party, there's pushback.
Definitely. Some folks think a more targeted approach would be better. Get some quick wins on the critical stuff.
It makes sense. But let's be real here. Getting anything through Congress these days is like trying to herd cats.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Especially with all the division within the Republican Party itself.
It's like they can't even agree on what they agree on.
Right. The Freedom Caucus, for example. They've made it crystal clear that border security is their #1 priority.
Right.
And they're not going to budge on that.
So anything that doesn't address it head on is a no-go.
Pretty much. Then you've got the moderate Republicans and those from high-tech states. They're not too keen on things like eliminating state and local tax deductions.
Yeah, that would hit their constituents pretty hard.
Exactly. So there's a lot of internal tension there.
Okay, so it's a mess. How in the world do they plan to navigate this minefield and actually get this bill passed?
Well, one option they're considering is using the budget reconciliation process.
Budget reconciliation.
It's basically a fast track for certain budgetary legislation. It lets them skip the Senate's 60-vote requirement to overcome a filibuster.
So they could potentially pass it with a simple majority.
Exactly.
Interesting. So a potential workaround, but it still sounds like a long shot.
It is. But hey, when you're dealing with a slim majority, you gotta get creative.
True, but even if they manage to pull it off, won't using a process like this make them look bad? Like they're just ramming through a controversial bill?
Oh, absolutely. Critics are gonna jump all over that. They'll say it undermines compromise and bipartisan cooperation.
Right, and if they try to rush it through, it'll just fuel accusations that they're putting their own agenda ahead of the country's needs.
Yeah, that's the potential downside.
So no matter what they do, They're going to get slammed.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's a lose-lose situation in some ways.
This whole thing really highlights the challenges of governing with a razor-thin margin.
It does. Trying to please everyone is a recipe for disaster.
You got that right. And with all the different players involved, the donors, the industries, the internal factions,
Don't forget about them.
right? They're all going to be vying for their own piece of the pie.
It's a political pressure cooker for sure.
So with all this chaos, do you think this mega bill actually has a chance of becoming law?
Honestly, it's anyone's guess. Even if everything goes perfectly, it probably won't happen before late spring at the earliest.
So we're in for a long ride.
Buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy one.
So much uncertainty, so much at stake. It's a real nail-biter. Now here's something for you to think about as we watch this all unfold.
Okay, I'm listening.
What if the Freedom Caucus gets their way and border security becomes the driving force behind this whole thing? What kind of compromises might we see on other issues? And how would those compromises affect your community, the country as a whole?
That's a great question. Something to ponder for sure.
All right, everyone, keep those questions coming, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.
Peace, bye.